Hello and welcome to the Heart of the World Review Show. I am your host, Christopher Hopkin.
And this is your other host, Julian Gorn.
Thank you for joining us for our Oscar ceremony. We're back to our regularly scheduled programming, starting with Hideo Takageshi's hit from Japan, Woman in the Dunes. Julian, do you want to tell us a little bit about Woman in the Dunes?
Yeah, Woman in the Dunes is the first sand-type movie. It follows this man who's a teacher from Tokyo, and he loves collecting bugs. So he goes to this desert to collect bugs, and then while he's there, he finds this little house to stay at for the night. And, it's kind of in a hole. He has to climb a ladder down. But then they pull the ladder up, and he's stuck in this hole, and he's forced to shovel sand. I will be doing a description of the plot later into the film, so spoiler warning, we highly suggest you watch this because it is a wonderful film.
Indubitably. I think we both recommend this one, so, continue at your own discretion, and we would, of course, both recommend you see the film.
Yeah. And so in this pit, he meets this woman. She's actually never named.
Do you know where she is?
What do you mean?
Do you know, location-wise? Is there, a certain landmark where this woman could be?
Hello?
This joke sucks. It's a dune. That's what I'm trying to get at. Woman in the
Dunes.
Okay.
Well, this woman is in the dunes, just like the name of the movie. And she's this lonely widow who lost her husband and her son in a sandstorm and sort of becomes attached to this teacher who is now trapped in this hole with her, except they are forced to do strenuous, intense labor.
Shovel sand.
Shovel sand for many hours. At first, the man tries to resist this. He refuses to shovel sand. He binds and gags her so that she can't shovel sand, except the people who are forcing him to shovel sand simply resist that by not giving him any rations or supplies until he is almost dying from dehydration and finally gives in. So alas, they spend the months shoveling sand, and you sort of see them grow closer in what I think is a very kind of codependent and not very healthy way, because they really are the only people, they really only have each other. And as they live in this rickety house, the man regularly makes escape plans and attempts, including making a grappling hook, which is actually his most successful one. He manages to get out, and when he does, he runs away until he is caught in quicksand and has to be pulled out and brought back.
Oh, the irony.
He also tries to set a crow trap and tie a note for this to this crow's foot that says that he's missing, which, doesn't work out as you might expect. And regularly he sort of clings on to this idea that people will file a missing persons report and come looking for him there, which also never happens. Finally, his one of his last ditch efforts is pleading to be able to see the beach once a day, which part of it is because he genuinely wants to see the beach, but also, you can tell he's trying to use it to formulate an escape plan. And they say that they'll only let him if he has sex with a woman in front of them all, which he tries to do against her consent, and she resists, and it's really messed up. He basically sexually assaults her, but it doesn't happen, and eventually, though, they do have a relationship. She does get pregnant, and as she's going into labor, I believe, the people of the village have to take her out of the hole. And while they do this, they just end up leaving the ladder behind. And the man finally has this escape route he's been searching for the whole time, and upon exiting the pit, looking out into the ocean, he decides to go back and says that he'll escape in a couple days, and first he wants to show the villagers this water system he created. And then we see a news clipping that says he has been missing for 7 years, and the movie ends on that.
Well, I'm very excited. I think there is a lot to talk about here, philosophically and even just content-wise.
For sure.
This movie is steeped deep in ideas. God, I don't even know where to start. We should say Takageshi, his father was a filmmaker. He was a documentary filmmaker.
Oh,
Takageshi,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he made a handful of narrative features. There's 3 that I think are, and somebody could correct me, are all based on the writer of this book that is based on, Woman in the Dunes, which is a popular surrealist book in Japan. His name is Kobo Abe. I started reading a Kobo Abe book one time.
What book was it?
I couldn't tell you. It was about a man who, in the middle of the night, a couple doctors come in and just steal his wife. And he's not really worried about it. But then in the morning, he's like, oh, shucks, I really should save my wife. He goes to the hospital to figure out where they took her. And then I think he meets a horse who thinks they're a man, and insists that the horse is the boss of the hospital, and that if he wants to see his wife again, he will have to do some jobs. I stopped reading the book at that point. This is a while ago, though, so I can't tell you how good Kobo Abe, a writer Kobo Abe is nowadays. But Takageshi would make 3 movies based around Kobo Abe's books. They liked working together. This is his most renowned films. And then he would follow in a documentary filmmaking path.
Right.
So, because I'm just, there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
You have to figure out where to go.
I want to just talk about the atmosphere first.
Okay.
I think this is an incredibly atmospheric film. You sort of feel throughout the movie that you are trapped with this school teacher in this hole. You just feel this kind of choking, claustrophobic feeling as he just tries to escape, and it's constantly tense, and you really sort of very much feel his dread and his kind of messed up feud with the other villagers. And if anything, you can really it honestly at times feels like a horror film. There's
Yes.
some very stressful, intense, scary stuff in here.
I think part of it is there's also, the desert is shot so well by Takageshi.
Oh my god, yeah.
And I think part of it is that, especially with the score, the word for it is eerie. I think the
Right.
desert feels really eerie, and you can constantly tell that something is really off about it.
Oh yeah.
There's something that is not correct about this desert. And they talk about it with the sand. Early in the film, one of our first things where it's this sand seems to have some kind of decaying power. It comes in multitudes, and it rots wood and everything. And the woman claims it attracts moisture, which the man says doesn't make any sense, because it doesn't. But generally, there is some really strange happenings going around in this desert that don't
Right.
really make sense. It's kind of out of this world in a certain, very subtle sense.
It's very surrealist undertones, I think.
Yes. I would not call this a surrealist film.
I
know
agree.
some people do. Some people call it an absurdist film, which I think philosophically it definitely is, but I think it's technically it's not. It is kind of direct, but there's definitely something that's really off-putting about the whole thing. And part of that, you thought it was exciting, was the score, right?
Oh my god, yeah.
Very kind of experimental, really.
Kind of minimalist, but in a creepy way. If you've ever listened to Penderecki, it kind of resembled something like that.
The whole thing is very esoteric. So sometimes when it is there, it's these loud clashes and bangs or kind of strings
sharp
instrument.
string notes.
Yeah, it's very disconcerting whenever it is there.
Yeah, and it's utilized in such a great way. For instance, it was actually used during a sex scene, which kind of just made it feel almost more like a horror scene.
The sex scenes are so
It was,
blindly
like-
awkward in this film.
Yeah, they're so tense. It's also really funny because like on the Letterboxd page, it's listed as like one of the taglines is erotic. This is not an erotic film at all, in my opinion.
I also think it's interesting that, I mean, you harp on claustrophobia, which I do think is correct, but sometimes the desert switches into a mode of not just claustrophobia, but instead a startling openness.
Right.
Where the subject itself is so small and minuscule, and it is a kind of nihilistic tendency to say that you can have zero impact on this world.
It is a film of two extremes.
Yes.
Sort of when you see his escape, you just see him like just lost in this vast dune with like just wandering aimlessly with no goal in mind other than escaping, which he doesn't do.
It's curious. His escapes often feel very pathetic as betrayed by the film.
And it's kind of interesting because, I mean, he definitely sets up interesting mechanisms.
Oh,
for them.
sure.
Like, the grappling hook was pretty cool.
And I mean, when we talk about, right, these pathetic escapes, that's what's so fantastic about that ending with the ladder.
Yeah.
Right? This idea that you get what you want, and everything before it was a futile effort. This is just bound to happen, and it comes in such a package where it is not exciting, it's not invigorating, it's just sad. Some guy just forgot to pull the ladder up. There's no rhyme, there's no reason, there was nothing that he could have done. It's just that everything that he tried, all the effort you put in, is made microscopic, just tiny, futile, smoldering efforts by just the ladder just being left by some dummy.
The whole like crow trap and everything, but
oh my god, it's just so sad. It's so miserable, and it's such a perfect way to do it. It is almost funny, and we talk about kind of this idea of humor. I think this is not a funny film, but there is a certain dark humor to this idea of the absurd elements, right? It is we talk about the idea of the absurd kind of conclusions of this. It is very absurd to think, okay, every thought-out effort that you could do is not going to work, except some dumb guy just left the ladder and you can just leave.
It is very interesting. I think this film is full of a lot of irony.
Oh, yeah.
And just a little example of this is at the beginning, he's like consistently complaining about how modern society is like governed by like various papers and certificates to like prevent people from like wronging each other, just to like get stuck in a hole and like just not having any of that.
You talk about irony, that is a core element of the film. The way that the film toys with just the levels of, I think the big word that we're dancing around here is control. When you watch this film, what I get is control.
Oh, absolutely.
Who we control. I mean, of course, there's a lot of sub-themes of that, but the idea, the kind of central thesis of this film is man and control, right? Man always wants control. Man will do anything to have control. And why that plays into our brains so heavily.
Right.
And we see this through these kind of microcosms, right, of different patterns of control. The village controlling and kind of putting on a show out of these people that they've trapped in the dune. The way that the man kind of attempts to control the woman sometimes.
Oh, I'd say a lot of times.
Yeah, the way that the man controls the bugs, even down to those bugs. Collecting those bugs and like having them, right?
Dude, when he burned those bugs, that was crazy. He burned his bug collection.
He did?
Yeah, he did.
Oh, I forgot. I was looking away from the screen. Oh, that's crazy. God, but I mean, because what that represents, right, is that microcosm of being able to have the control, of being able to collect the bugs. I am still better than some of these things. I can catch them. I can capture them. I can have them.
I think if anything, him burning the bugs was like him relinquishing that control, relinquishing his any last attempts to reconnect with his outside life.
Yes, I definitely see that. It is interesting though. We talk about control, and I think that is what is essential to the ending.
Yeah.
I think that's what the ending is about. He goes, right, he leaves the pit, and he comes across the sea, and he is so small and minuscule and meaningless.
Just pathetic.
He's nothing. And so he goes back, and I think, if you ask me, the reason he doesn't leave is because he is in an environment in which he can control. He would rather have the bucket of water that comes out of the sand because of this strange contraption than have the entire sea.
Yes.
Because being free means that you have nothing.
Yeah.
Whereas he can become the king of this tiny domain that means nothing.
And it's also interesting. You definitely see that reflected a lot in the woman. I think I forget the direct quote, but it's something like, "If it wasn't for the sand, you or nobody else would care for me." And I think that little things like that. I think that
if it weren't for the sand, no one would bother about me.
Yeah. It very much shows that she also feels very dependent on the sand, and it's the only thing she knows and has control over, even though as she lives here, she is being exploited and controlled by these other villagers.
And again, we're talking about irony, because as much as he has a great quote when they have this conversation outside that really is meant to contrast their kind of, and we could really delve into the woman here, but contrasting the standouts of their worldview, right? The man is invigorated to escape. That is the reason he lives for. The woman is invigorated to survive in the dune, to live the way that it is. That is what she is going toward, right? Because what we see here is the lack of meaning. This is a conversation about meaning, and the whole film is about meaning. Where do we get meaning, right? If we're tiny and we're in the whole sea, how do we find any other meaning than a pathetic bucket in the middle of the sand dune? He has a quote, "Are you shoveling sand to live or living to shovel sand?" At what point does what you're doing constitute your life, right?
Right.
What is the meaning of their existence? They prolong it. They do everything, right? They just have to function in the sand world. But there's no changing that. There's no purpose to it. It's just going and going and going.
It is a very Sisyphusian task. Just endlessly shovel sand, and it's all they're delegated to do, just with no end in sight.
And again, we're talking about, kind of just the word pathetic, right? But the idea that they're shoveling sand, they're enslaved because the village elders can make chump change selling the sand at half price to cement companies.
Yeah.
It's for nothing. It's all meaningless.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just, when you hear that line, it is so funny to think that all of this suffering, an entire life wasted, because some guys thought it would be cool to sell sand to a cement company to make a minuscule amount of money.
Yes, definitely. I think in a sense, I mean, it's greatly exaggerated, but if anything, it is a very anti-capitalist film as well.
Oy vey. I mean, you talk about, originally when I was looking at the film, right, we're kind of seeing a lot of metaphors for societal bonds in a sort of kind of Buddhist lens of this idea of the inert suffering of not accepting. And as much as, the man is explicitly not accepting and the woman is implicitly not accepting of their conditions, that they are just in a system of a circular suffering that kind of resembles our own life, a meaningless romp into suffering.
Right.
That's all that there is. It's just, and that's where the absurdism comes in, right? Because even then, it's not just this suffering, it's also the irony that, even our desires are made to play against us, right? You look at the sex in the sand dune, and then you look at suddenly you could have freedom as long as you all have sex right in front of the entire village.
Right.
Or you look at you can aspire to finally gain freedom this entire time, and then we'll just leave a rope, and sorry, that's it. But this idea of suffering, and it is really embodied in the cartoon. There's a scene in which the man gets a newspaper, he sees a cartoon on it. It's a really bad cartoon of this guy just plowing over this other guy with a steamroller. And he goes, "Wow, you have such a good attitude." And the guy getting steamrolled goes, "I always smile." And the man thinks this is absolutely hilarious. He's laughing and laughing.
He laughs so hard.
But then he just stops.
Yeah.
Because it is an epitome
Gets
of
mad
the entire
too.
film. Yeah, exactly. Because then he's reminded he's just suffering without any meaning.
Right.
His only meaning is to see suffering, and that only causes further suffering because he just keeps failing so cruelly. Even if you manage to escape the sand dune, what are the two things that happen when he escapes the sand dune? He gets in a smaller contraption, he gets stuck in quicksand, trapped again, or he escapes and he just decides he's got to go back.
Right.
There's no winning.
I think it's also especially interesting to examine how much the woman feels dependent on the man.
Yes.
She lost her husband, and this man sort of becomes her only source of human connection, and it's just such a gross, horrible relationship. Where
She keeps repeating, "I'm afraid," because
Yes.
she dreams of dying alone, and that's what happens to her in the film.
It feels as if her only fear throughout this movie is being left alone.
She gives the man this look when she's being carried away with this ectopic pregnancy. She's going to die, and I think she does die. She gives him a look
I also think she
of
does.
just complete despair.
Yeah.
Because you look at this man, right, who was before filled with a gritty hope to one day escape. That's all he had. And as much as the woman says that she's accepting of her circumstances, her desire for the radio and just the way that she acts around the man, it is very clear that this has some meaning to her.
Right.
That she is kind of dependent on this hope. She wants somebody else to be able to hope, right? And you can talk about what that means for the idea of the female condition, right? But even then, her character, I talk about implicit non-acceptance, implicit denial. She clearly is kind of relying on the man for denial,
Yes.
right? He will escape. She has hope in him, and that's what motivates her. The look that she gives when she's being carried away is a look of, it's over, right? Because the man has transformed from just this poor guy from the city, right? The guy with hope, the guy with denial, the guy with action, to one of these villagers. And we see that most definitely, I think, in that scene where the villagers try to make them have sex.
Yes. Oh my God. It feels like every form of resistance he had just ends, and he
It's
just
over.
turns to
You can see it.
abuse her.
You can see it when he leaves the dune. He's just not the same guy anymore.
Yes.
His life has been shifted. He's no longer the guy who went out to the desert to catch bugs.
I think it's also interesting to examine that in contrast with the villagers' sort of attitude towards him.
Sure.
As the film goes on, it feels like these villagers are less and less just ruthlessly laughing at him the whole time, and I think that's very much because he's becoming one of them, but in sort of this very Stockholm syndrome-y way.
The man who exploits.
Yes.
He's turned from the exploited, and even you could say that he's still exploited, but he's turned from the exploited to a person who does exploit. He exploits the woman, he exploits the barrel of water.
Right.
He wants to be in control, even if he knows, right? We live in an empire of dust. Everything will come and go, all composite things are subject to decay. But to be able to have and believe in that empire of dust, in that nothingness, to have that barrel of water and have some kind of meaning with it, that is worth everything to him.
Yeah.
It's really, you talk about this is a tragic film, I think.
So tragic.
this is a much more nihilistic absurdism than the kind of absurdism that we see.
It just it feels almost like constricting the way this movie develops. It's just like every second you just feel more deep in this like horridness, and it's just it can be a very hard to watch film too.
It's crushing, and the film itself feels maddening. It feels like it is making you go crazy. And I especially had that thought when he opens the crow trap and there's just a bunch of water in it.
Yeah.
With no reason, and he tries to find a reason, but I think even then you go, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Because that's another thing where it's like, what the heck is going on here, right? There's just something that isn't right. Or like, here's another thing is the woman, right? She says, my husband, is it her husband and her son or her husband and her daughter?
Husband and son, I believe.
At one point she does say her daughter. So, I mean, that's interesting if those switch or if we're just bad listeners. But we'll make a point out of it in case we're wrong. She says they're consumed by the sand. And the way the sand gives you rashes if it lands on you when you're sleeping.
It really just is this like essence that consumes everything.
There's something really twisted about the whole affair.
Yeah, and it's so like this is easily the sandiest movie I've ever seen, and by that I mean that just the way that sand as a force of nature is just incorporated into absolutely everything. Like, I feels like nothing in this movie doesn't have like some major part that is played by sand.
Yeah, I wrote two things. I wrote sand is bugs and sand is like sickness. There's something kind of very viral about the sand.
Yeah.
It's like very parasitic. It's just this outside force that's crushing in on you. It is suffering. It is destruction. There's no escaping it.
And he there's all these like wonderful shots of just sand like collapsing and like of this kind of erosion. And you just sort of see that as like he tries to run up the side of a hill and the sand just keeps falling under him.
Or there's really nasty shots of their like really sweaty bodies just kind of covered in sand. The sand like sticking to them like an infection. It's really gross. Do you have any final thoughts about the film? We have to move on, which is really sad, but this is an incredible film.
I think this is a film I definitely haven't seen anything like. And it's so incredible. I think, honestly, this sounds kind of funny. Honestly, okay, this is going to sound very strange, but only the film I've seen that feels closest to this is Midsummer.
Okay.
Ari Aster.
Yeah.
Just because the way it had very similar undertones of, like, just being controlled by this group and, like just being kind of enclosed by them and just like progressing further and further into their like shenanigans until you become a part of them. I felt kind of similar.
I was actually thinking a lot about Being John Malkovich of all things.
Oh, really?
Just because of the way that you're talking about ceaseless control for no reason. It's kind of perverted in the sense it's just really miserable. We always desire I got to be in control of something else, because otherwise, what are we, right?
Right.
And you just can't accept that. So instead you say, I have to be something by asserting myself over something else. And you see that as a through line throughout Being John Malkovich, another fantastic film, and the film that got me into art cinema. So, I mean, I'll just say, for last things about this movie, from my perspective, at first, I wasn't huge on it. I thought it's good, and it was one of those movies where I said, okay, this is a really good one, but this is not going to be like one of my favorites. And especially talking about it now, it keeps growing on you. I think the more and more that you think about it, it is a whole statement.
Yeah, and I think it was a movie that at least for me, it just left me in absolute shock, and it really rewards you as a viewer just in terms of the sort of intellectual thinking and capacity you get out of it, I think.
When you talk about what you're looking for, this kind of, section of thought-provoking cinema, you're talking about you want to see a whole argument in many different angles and thoughts, and just building that out of the abstract, out of the art, right?
Right.
And I don't think there's a film that's so Woman in the Dune is a film that exemplifies that. This is a whole thought, a whole debate.
Right.
This is an encapsulation of both modern constraints and internal constraints, the constraints of man.
There's really nothing like it, I think.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Did you have any honorable mentions to give out?
I haven't been able to watch much lately. So.
I saw. Okay. I know what I want to talk about. Jacques. So, I was watching so many silent films for the Oscar episode, and I actually wanted to watch more. So I just randomly remembered about this movie called Jacques by Abel Gance, French Impressionism. Very forgotten, oft forgotten film movement. And oh my God, it's got to be one of the best movies ever. That's just something I'll say. Definitely my favorite silent movie now. I used to be a Modern Times guy, but now I'm a Jacques guy. It is a drama. It is long.
It's about war.
It's 2.5 hours. It's about a lot of things.
Made in 1919, right?
In 1919.
That's wild.
Oh my God, 100 years, before it should have been. No, but the style is what I mean. The way Abel Gance manipulates film is just an absolute showcase of what film should be, what film was meant to be. It is the epitome of film. This is what you want to see from the medium. You want to see thought, you want to see art, you want to see drama, you want to see, experimentation. And it is firing on every single cylinder for 2.5 hours. Teared up a bunch. That movie really blasts you in the heart. I guess we're talking about 2 of those today, but that I can't recommend Jacques enough.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
How time flies. We'd like to thank our showrunner, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
This will most likely, at least for the time being, be our final review with Somerville High School. We might come back after the summer, but otherwise, this will be it. And this will definitely be our final recording with showrunner Dan. So,
right.
Of course, one final thank you. And we thanked a bunch of people in our previous Oscar episode, but we want to, reinstate. We want to thank all the people that have helped out the show in the past. We want to thank Will and Brian, especially our 2 previous cameramen. It's really been an honor to work with all of them and to have this opportunity. And I think we have enjoyed it in multitudes.
Yeah.